This man, traveling through deep space, suddenly realizes his ship won't reach its destination for another 90 years. He sees everyone else is still in deep hibernation, but for some reason, he's the only one who woke up early. Terrified of dying of old age alone on the ship, he rushes back to his pod, desperate to go back to sleep. However, after waiting forever, there's no response. Even worse, the oxygen in the pod starts venting out rapidly. Panicking, the man tries everything to force the door open, but it's useless. Just at the last second, the pod malfunctions again and pops open, allowing him to escape just before he suffocates to death. He tries to send a distress signal back to Earth, but the AI informs him it will take 19 years to get there, and a reply won't arrive for at least 55. Realizing he's in deep trouble, Jim finds the control room to seek help, but he's locked out due to insufficient clearance. Through the window, he sees the crew members still fast asleep, refusing to just give up and die. Jim grabs a sledgehammer and tries to break in to get help. But the control room doors are incredibly solid. Even an industrial blowtorch can't leave a single scratch on them. In the end, he tries every method possible, but he still can't open that steel door. Just as a hopeless Jim is wandering aimlessly around the ship, he's shocked to see someone else standing at the bar. But when a hopeful Jim rushes over to the counter and takes a closer look, he realizes the other person is just an android bartender. Jim is completely devastated, forced to accept his fate of growing old and dying alone. But he doesn't want to live his remaining days in misery. Since he can't go back to sleep, he decides to live in the moment and enjoy his time. He stops following the ship's class restrictions and boldly breaks into the grand suite. He moves into the luxury room meant for the ultra-rich and starts using all the entertainment facilities as he pleases. When he gets bored, he goes to the high-end restaurants and stuffs his face with gourmet food. But this life of total freedom only lasts so long. After living like a total slob, Jim begins to find it all meaningless. His emotions start to become extremely unstable as the long-term loneliness causes him to lose track of time. He constantly complains about his unfair fate, wondering why everyone else gets to sleep peacefully while he's the only unlucky one who woke up. But during one of his explorations, Jim luckily discovers that in the back of the hibernation area, there is an independent space. 2 spacesuits are stored here. Following the AI's instructions, Jim puts on a suit and, with the help of magnetic boots, presses the red release button. After hooking onto a safety tether, Jim steps out to the edge of the ship and sees the vast, infinite universe for the first time without any obstructions. After looking around, he deactivates the magnets and floats out into the endless depths of space. Looking at the dark and mysterious void before him, Jim finally breaks down in tears. Compared to these brilliant, shining stars around him, his own life feels so small. Not even worth a single speck of dust. Jim sees no hope for the future. The infinite loneliness even makes him think about ending it all, rather than waiting for death in daily despair. He'd rather become dust and vanish into the depths of the universe. Now, he just needs to press this red button, and without any protection, he would instantly be pulled out into the void to end his miserable life forever. After a long time, Jim still couldn't find the courage, as the fear of death eventually overcame his inner loneliness. But it was because of this moment of hesitation that Jim, as he turned to leave, caught a glimpse of an earthly angel who made his heart skip a beat. Her appearance didn't just give the despondent Jim a renewed sense of hope for the future. It directly altered the fate of the 5,000 sleeping passengers on the ship. While watching the executive, Aurora Lane, speak so eloquently in her video bio, Jim's lonely heart was instantly captivated. From then on, Jim spent his days by her side. He stayed near the sleeping beauty, eating his meals while smiling like a fool at her video archives. But as he learned more about her, a terrifying thought began to take root in his mind. If he were to wake her from her slumber, perhaps his own life would no longer be lonely, but it would also mean her life would be ruined forever. Jim's heart was trapped in an agonizing dilemma, and he even went as far as seeking an answer from Arthur the robot. Looking at the emotionless robot in front of him, Jim, unable to bear the loneliness any longer, finally made his decision. He shed his disheveled look, shaved his beard, cut his hair, and restored his handsome appearance. Even though his heart was still racing, he approached the hibernation pod with his tools, because from that first accidental glance, Pandora's box had already been opened. Seeing that Aurora was about to be awakened, Jim's expression instantly shifted from anticipation to panic, because he knew clearly that his actions just now were no different from a bloodless murder. So, before Aurora could fully regain consciousness, Jim grabbed his tools and bolted back to his room. He was too cowardly to seek release through his own death, yet he dared to personally destroy a stranger's hibernation pod and commit this crime. Complex emotions left him incredibly nervous, but the mistake had been made and couldn't be undone. As the elevator moved, Jim pretended to hear a noise and went to the grand concourse, where he bumped into the awakened Aurora, who was searching for people. At this moment, Aurora was exactly like he was a year ago, completely confused and lost in her new surroundings. But when she learned from Jim that they were the only 2 passengers who woke up due to an accident, and that they'd have to live alone on the ship for 89 years, likely dying of old age before seeing their new home, Aurora panicked. Unable to accept this reality, she turned and ran, still dreaming that she could just climb back into her pod and restart the hibernation. She frantically searched for her pod but couldn't find it anywhere. Jim grabbed the hysterical Aurora and told her he had already tried that method and it wouldn't work. Gradually calming down, Aurora felt mentally exhausted and just wanted to go back and sleep it off. Jim went to the bar and asked Arthur, the only one who knew he woke her up, to keep his secret. Arthur agreed. The next day, Jim took Aurora to the cafeteria for breakfast. Aurora was different from a broke guy like Jim and could order a premium gold tier breakfast, which was a world apart from Jim's basic meal. The generous writer then treated Jim to a local feast, and Aurora, feeling there was still hope, was just like Jim at the start and refused to give up on finding a way home. Over the next generation, she searched through every bit of data and every clue she could find. Just like Jim, she desperately wanted to break into the command center and take full control. But it was all in vain. Jim had already tried all of this a year ago. Finally accepting reality, Aurora found Jim and asked him how he had managed to survive this past year on his own. And so, Jim brought her over to the dance machine. Except this time, he finally had someone to try out the 2-player co-op mode with. After that, they played basketball, went to the cinema, and visited Arthur's bar. All these activities helped ease Aurora's pent-up frustration and finally brought a smile to her face. Their once hopeless life was finally starting to look up. In the days that followed, things between Jim and Aurora heated up quickly. Jim stayed up all night without a wink of sleep to build a model of a famous landmark from Aurora's hometown, New York City. She was deeply moved. She never expected this guy, who usually looked so rugged and tough, to actually have such a sensitive and thoughtful side. Jim even modified a cleaning robot by mounting a camera on top and remotely piloted it right over to Aurora's side. A little slip of paper popped out from the robot's compartment. Aurora opened it up and realized that Jim wanted to ask her out on a dinner date that evening. Aurora asked the little robot if she should say yes, and the robot nodded its head. So, Aurora wrote down her reply on the note. Jim nervously opened the paper and let out a huge smile because Aurora had agreed to go out with him. When evening came, the 2 of them dressed up and shared a meal in the restaurant. They talked about their past experiences and got to know each other much better. After dinner, Jim took Aurora to his secret base where the spacesuits were kept. It just so happened there was a female suit there as well. But since Aurora was wearing a dress, it was a bit awkward, so she told Jim to turn around. Right behind his back, Aurora took off her dress and playfully tossed it at Jim's feet. The 2 astronauts then stepped outside the ship. Jim unlocked Aurora's electromagnetic tether, took her hand, and they floated out together into the vast universe. It seems that even in the loneliest of places, as long as you're with someone you love, it can become the most romantic spot imaginable. Jim and Aurora were together in that cold, empty ship, like 2 refugees on a deserted island, waiting for rescue, needing each other to survive. They became a passionate couple and spent every day happily. But good times don't last forever, and fate loves to play tricks. On Aurora's birthday, the 2 of them were celebrating and drinking at Arthur's bar. Aurora was very happy and remarked how she and Jim were so close that they had no secrets between them. When the android Arthur heard this, he took it as an instruction. While Jim went to the restroom, he pulled an engagement ring out from his pocket. It turned out he was planning to propose to Aurora today. Meanwhile, the android Arthur revealed to Aurora the very secret that he had been keeping for Jim. At that moment, Jim returned and saw the look on Aurora's face, instantly knowing things had gone wrong. Once Aurora heard Jim confirm the truth, she felt like she was going to faint. She couldn't believe it. The man she had just fallen in love with was actually the one who woke her up early and ruined her life, making her realize that everything before this was a total lie. Just like that, Aurora kept Jim at a distance, and they both lived in a deep freeze. Even when going to the bar, they'd take different shifts to avoid each other. Meanwhile, the ship started glitching more and more often. Jim was even trapped mid-air once when the elevator suddenly stalled. One morning while Aurora was eating breakfast, the sprinklers malfunctioned and soaked her. Right then, a man's voice came over the intercom, ordering all conscious passengers to the central concourse. They both rushed to the hall and found a man in uniform standing right in the center. It turns out he was the 3rd person to be woken up. He was the ship's chief deck officer. Just like Jim, a system failure had accidentally triggered his awakening. He led them into the bridge, a command center they had both been dreaming of entering but never could. The chief pulled up the logs to find the glitch, but the data files were totally corrupted. With no other choice, he had to go and manually inspect the hardware. After checking 3 of the malfunctioning cryopods, the chief started to piece together exactly what was going wrong. He discovered that while he and Jim were woken up by system errors, Aurora had been woken up manually by Jim. Strangely, the chief didn't blame Jim for it. Aurora, still feeling uneasy, confronted the chief and asked him what she was supposed to do about the situation. The chief tried his best to console her. He explained that Jim was like a drowning man, And a drowning man's first instinct is to grab onto whoever is nearby and pull them down too. Later, back in his room, the chief began coughing violently and realized he was spitting up blood. That night, a restless Aurora went to the pool to swim and clear her head. Suddenly, the ship malfunctioned again. The entire vessel lost power, causing the artificial gravity to fail. All the water in the pool began to lift and float into the air. Aurora was trapped inside a massive, floating sphere of water, unable to break free. With no gravity to help her swim out, she was seconds away from drowning. Luckily, the power flickered back on. Gravity returned, and Aurora narrowly escaped with her life. The three of them rushed back to the bridge. Since the system had rebooted, the database was finally accessible. The chief looked into the history of the ship's failures and saw that the ship had been using a powerful energy shield to deflect space debris during its journey. However, a year ago, a massive asteroid appeared out of nowhere and slammed right through the shield. The fragments pelted the hull, and that initial impact was the root cause of every single malfunction they were now facing. Suddenly, the chief collapsed without warning. Jim and Aurora rushed him to the medical bay. A system scan revealed he had over 600 internal injuries. It turns out his pod had malfunctioned while he was still inside, causing massive physical trauma while he was unconscious. Realizing he didn't have much time left, the chief handed his command wristband to Jim. This gave Jim the clearance to access every restricted area of the ship. He pleaded with Jim to fix the vessel, reminding him that 5,000 lives depended on it. After saying that, he collapsed into Jim's arms and passed away. Before Jim and Aurora could even grieve, a massive tremor shook the entire ship. The failures were cascading quickly now, so they raced toward the engine room. But the gravity failed again and sent them both flying. Would you like me to generate an image of the floating water sphere scene to help visualize that moment? They went flying into the air, and as gravity kicked back in, they both slammed down hard. They reached the power core where Jim found the reactor's control computer was damaged, likely from the impact. Luckily, the ship had spare parts. With Aurora's help, Jim managed to swap them out. But a new problem cropped up. The reactor's heat couldn't vent. Jim tried several times but kept failing. The vent hatch had to be opened manually from the outside, or the ship would soon explode. Jim put on his suit, grabbed a heat shield, and prepared to go out and manually open the vent. As he was leaving, Aurora confessed her feelings to him. Jim reached the vent tunnel and forced the hatch open, but the moment he let go, it slammed shut. This meant that to vent the heat, Jim had to stay at the hatch and endure the searing blast of thousands of degrees. He told Aurora to pull the lever immediately, but she was desperate not to. Seeing the reactor temperature climbing and the heat shield ready to shatter at any second, Aurora had no choice but to pull the lever. Jim was blown into space by the heat blast, and his tether snapped clean off. The reactor vented successfully and systems returned to normal, but Jim's suit was torn and his oxygen was fading. He drifted aimlessly through space, saying a final goodbye to Aurora. Aurora donned a suit and tracked Jim's location. She flew toward him, but her tether wasn't long enough and she was pulled back. Luckily, she caught Jim's broken tether and managed to pull him back to the ship. Aurora put Jim into the med pod, but the system showed no vital signs. Using the captain's high-level access wristband, Aurora activated every emergency resuscitation mode on Jim and began the procedure. After a frantic rescue using the ship's most advanced medical tech, Aurora finally pulled Jim back from the brink of death. With the ship repaired, it once again returned to normal and continued its journey toward their new home. Inside the ship, Jim made a new discovery. The high-level access wristband allowed the medpod to function as a hibernation chamber. He shared the good news with Aurora, telling her she could go back to sleep and wake up 90 years later at their new home to finish what she originally intended to do. Time flew by, and 90 years passed. When everyone else finally woke up, they were shocked to find the main hall filled with lush green plants. It turned out Aurora hadn't chosen to go back to sleep, but decided to stay and spend the rest of her life with the man she loved. Jim gave her the long-awaited engagement ring. Although their feelings were once lost in a sea of resentment, they eventually found each other again. Aurora no longer cared about where they were headed, choosing instead to cherish the present and walk hand in hand with Jim through every beautiful moment of their lives together.